the circular economy is dead. You can't manage what you don't measure. I'm not a huge fan of carbon offsets.
Me neither.
The issue lies, again, in the same token that we need to start looking at materials more seriously.
And I love that, how you're not only focusing on resources, but really about finding those synergies.
There's a growing movement of companies that are B Corps in the region. Plastic is far better for the environment than any of the other alternatives.
Rana, welcome to Impact Talk. Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Talk. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Rana Hajirasouli, the founder and CEO of The Surplus, a UAE-based Certified B Corp company. The Surplus is the world's first B2B platform that transforms underutilized resources into revenue through its patented technology. Rana is a climate tech innovator, system thinker, and passionate advocate for climate positive action. With over 13 years of experience, she's a recognized expert in sustainability, climate change, and the circular economy, empowering businesses to achieve resource efficiency through effective and profitable cross-industry collaboration. Rana, welcome to Impact Talk.
Thank you so much, Nadine. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Likewise, how are you doing?
Not bad, thank you. I can't complain. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you again on another
Really good to be
podcast.
here. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be back.
So, Rana, I want to start my conversation by something I saw on LinkedIn, actually, because I'm following you on LinkedIn. I love your post, but I also like your comments on other posts on LinkedIn.
So you've seen them.
Yes, and always on point. And there was something that, got my attention last time because you commented saying something about carbon tunnel vision. It made me realize how much of the conversation, around sustainability is very much focused on CO2 emissions. So what does it mean, carbon tunnel vision, and what are we getting wrong here?
So I think it's important to start with a bit of context that when we talk about climate, I think carbon or carbon emissions or CO2 equivalent is always sort of the star of the show, right? And in that sense, a lot of the sort of agenda is always around how can we mitigate these emissions as much as possible? And how do we get all of the sort of, impact associated with what we're doing at the end goal of reducing those emissions. Now, I think what the whole thematic of carbon tunnel vision posits is there's so much more to intersectional climate action than just carbon. There's biodiversity loss, there's resource depletion, there is, erosion of soil quality, there's livelihoods of people's jobs, there's D&I, there's so much that goes behind climate action that I think that often the unfortunate result of it is that we get caught up in this whole, how can we reduce carbon as much as possible? Then we get taken to sort of other layers that stop action at its core. So what do I mean by that? We can take carbon offsets. You might know I'm not a huge fan of carbon offsets.
Me neither.
In general, and I'm glad we're on the same page about that. But often what we find is that there's this entire system that has to dictate that we don't actually need to change our operations. We don't need to change the way that we're viewing materials and energy and so on, or the way that we're interacting with ecology. So what the issue with that is, it means that it gives essentially, let's say, polluting companies a sort of green pass to say, we'll just allocate this much capital to just offsetting our emissions somewhere on the other side of the world and continue doing whatever we're doing. So it goes to say that we're not really getting to the core of the problem, which is there needs to be some sort of transformative action. There needs to be interdisciplinary collaboration that goes outside of people's, siloed sort of way of working, whether it's within departments or it's, intra-company and so on and so forth. So I think that the major obstacle that we have is how can we stop just talking about carbon? Because carbon is also essential for life. I feel like we've demonized it. We've made it very evil, but without carbon, there is no life. So we need to start working against it and start working towards it and look at carbon as a fundamental sort of, let's say, result of our current linear systems. But at the same time, we need to also understand that it is something that we have produced as humans for too much, in the wrong place at the wrong time. So how do we manage that with that perspective in mind as well?
Absolutely. And you know what you said about it's evil? It reminded me a discussion I had with William McDonough, one of the pioneers of the
Mhm.
circular economy and the author of Cradle to Cradle, the book. And we advise our audience also to look into that. And he said something like carbon is not the enemy and that we need to kind of shift the conversation.
Right on.
So how the circular economy, like this is exactly, what you work on and what you advocate for. How does it fit into this conversation?
So I'm going to sound like a little bit of a goon here. Bear with me. So, in my humble opinion, if I'm going to be extremely brutally honest about this, is that the circular economy is dead. Okay.
Oh, wow.
It's a statement. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Fundamentally, in order for us to aspire for what we're calling the circular economy is actually, in theory, thermodynamically impossible. There's too much entropy that's produced in today's supply chains for us to be able to reach that. So we take, let's say, materials, let's say plastic. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for plastic. I am not against plastic. Actually, the science dictates plastic is far better for the environment than any of the other alternatives. However,
we need to stop here. Can you elaborate on that?
yeah. So if we're looking at it from like a material flow analysis cycle, or we're looking at it from an actual performance cycle, plastic is actually generally far better in terms of the water it uses, in terms of energy, in terms of recyclability, and so on. The caveat is that when we're looking at the sort of, let's say, the juncture between energy systems and material systems, there is a tension point. That tension point is like the sciatica of climate action, right? It's a royal pain in your spine, and that's called the circular economy. There's a reason I think that like the ambition for circular economy has been so high, but the action towards that has been so fragmented. We've never reached anything on a global level beyond 9% of circularity. I mean, we're going way above that. The reason for that is that there's too much entropy produced. Entropy is essentially, again, we're looking at it from like a pure STEM basis, is that there's chemistry and there's physics involved in this. And thermodynamically, if we're looking at it, there's too much disorganization and too much chaos in that system for us to be able to do what we're saying that we want to do, which is, let's say, infinite recycling loops or upcycling loops. You need energy for that. The problem is energy also requires materials, right? So in order for us to have electricity and, for me to go home and cook my terrible pasta dish tonight, I need energy to make that. But fundamentally is the issue lies, again, in the same token that we need to start looking at materials more seriously. And so the concept that we've been looking at, again, forget our name as the surplus. Please bear in mind that there's a whole history behind the name, actually, in terms of surplus, the word, is we're looking at it from the surplus economy perspective. That's the bare bone pillar. That's the foundation of what we're proposing could be a way to sort of spearhead this action into circular economy, meeting people where they're at, meaning nations, corporates, entrepreneurs, the private sector, the informal economy cannot transition because they don't know what we actually have and what is usable. So can we bring visibility to that cycle? And number one. And number two, can we bridge that gap in terms of who are the actual solution providers within your localized economy that can actually do something about this? So when we're talking about these mass adoption gaps, I think it's also fair to say people are trying their best. We've got amazing solution providers, in most economies. The question is, most businesses don't know where to find them, and most governments are looking to identify them. So let's start with identification and then get to a little bit more ambitious goal.
And what does it mean in a context like the Middle East? Because you're based in the UAE, Rana, same for your company. So what makes the region different, or I would say unique in this perspective?
We've got a region that has some of the highest density of economic zones in the world. So just to put into context, and like stop me if I go off track here, but I'm like a complete economic zone geek, and they're fascinating for a couple of reasons. The first is these zones operate like free zones. So initially they started prodding up a lot in Africa because they were a way for corporations to sort of like bring in their talent pool, their infrastructure, and provide for the local economy without actually being subject to some of the potentially unfavorable laws and general geopolitical state. So it was almost like a corridor to get these large corporations in that could benefit the broader economy. Over the years, they've diversified. In UAE alone, we have more than 47 free zones or economic zones. Interchangeably, they're used. So what that actually means is that there is such an opportunity for what we call the circular economy, or my new go-to in 2025 is the surplus economy, for these companies to be able to collaborate with each other. I've often talked about industrial symbiosis, which is a subset of the circular economy. You know about it well. We've chewed your ear about it all the time. But essentially, it's...
Can you explain to our audience?
Yeah, of course. I was just going, because most people are like, it sounds like, actually someone said industrial sambusas. I was like, that's a great idea. That's making me hungry. It is just as delicious for my eyes, but then again, it's not everyone's taste. So industrial symbiosis is basically a subset of circular economy where you have co-located companies in different industries exchanging byproducts, wastes, effluents, anything that goes to waste, essentially, whether it is from a capacity standpoint in terms of, let's say, stranded assets, extra warehouse space, surplus energy and steam, all the way down to physical materials. And they do that because they reduce waste management costs, they increase innovation, and of course, it's beneficial for the environment as well. Now, what we've been trying to do, and what I'm particularly passionate about, is bringing industrial symbiosis into the region. That has a monumental impact in terms of climate action because it provides intersectional collaboration opportunity, enormous amounts of environmental savings, and more importantly, it actually has a really tangible bottom line advantage as well. So companies will get richer. And there is opportunities, for banks to start financing these projects as well. So let's just look at it from this perspective. We have enormous amounts of desalination technology here, as you know, that contributes to the region's water scarcity. And the region actually wastes more than $10 billion a year, where they could actually be gaining $10 billion a year just by using that brine in industrial cooling, for example. So you have that from an industrial perspective, but you can also take it down to the small to medium enterprise as well. So a small, fashion startup, for example, or, let's say an expert such as yourself, you would be able to collaborate with other entities and, get them on the track to sustainability through your knowledge hours. They would be able to reallocate their tech stars somewhere else, so on and so forth. The bottom line here is there's a diversified economy that has opportunities to integrate these really interdisciplinary sustainability outcomes just by collaborating with each other. And because they're in close proximity, there's the real value add.
And this is what basically the surplus as a startup, what you're trying to achieve by building this platform.
Yes, on a much a more humble scale. We're trying to sort of, do that to provide the layer of collaboration and digitization, that is to say.
I found it very interesting because, just take the word collaboration. You go to any conversation around sustainability, they will all say, we need to collaborate, we need to partner, we need to collaborate.
Right on, yeah.
Practically speaking, we know that it's not that easy, actually. And I love that, how you're not only focusing on resources, but really about finding those synergies. And I think that's a word that you use at the surplus, and, creating them and helping, organizations to come together and truly collaborate.
It is a core part. Actually, it's funny you said this. A few days ago, I was actually on a panel, and there was just, a lot of these really, great corporate sustainability experts, and they were talking about collaboration. As usual, I went off the wagon and I was like, all right, whatever. I just put my notes down. I was like, guys, it's a small panel, right? The audience is small. How many of you actually collaborate on a daily basis? And they were like, I do. Look at me. I'm from a Big Four company. And so they did. And so I was like, how many of you actually collaborate with people outside of your own department in a different industry? They were like, what do you mean? So I think it's always important to kind of bring it back and say, talk to the people that disagree with you, right? We are in echo chambers all the time. I've actually had to cut back going to sustainability conferences because the conversations are very circular. I mean, not in the circular economy way, but we just repeat the same thing over and over to people that are already in the same mindset. So what the system is trying to do is get people from opposite ends of the sort of perspective table to actually talk to each other. So a sustainability startup who's offering these fantastic services will never, speak to let's say a well-established medium-sized enterprise to their CFO. It'll be very difficult for them to actually get there. So I think it's really important to speak to people who are outside of your division, outside of your realm of expertise, and also gain the feedback, because ultimately, with a lot of innovation cycles, and I'm sure you know this very well, is that there needs to also be a certain level of, I guess, what we call in the startup world, product market fit. So we know this product could do well in theory. It would cost us less, but how do we get the sort of go ahead? Can we secure, enough secondary raw materials, would the CFO be fine with it? It actually requires on a project management level a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration. So we try to get that to happen at the beginning of the cycle rather than at the middle or at the end to avoid bottlenecks.
How do you make it happen at the beginning of the cycle?
So we just map them. It's part of our onboarding. So what are the resources that you have? What are the resources that you need? Can you share them? And what are the relevant approvals required for that? And what are the outcomes if things go well with that? So if you were going to co-share your warehouse space, what are the approvals that you need? They would speak to, let's say, for example, it might be municipality, it might be their, asset or property manager, and so on. If you were going to be, let's say, diverting this sort of waste from landfill to a solution provider, what are the relevant approvals that you need for this process? So there's no bottlenecks once that happens, because once there are, those are the teething issues that stop that. And a major bottleneck right now that we're noticing is reverse logistics, but this is a global problem. So we actually we're working with Aramex at the moment. They're one of our partners to try to solve this problem, to say, instead of getting waste management to throw your stuff or sort it or whatever, can you actually intervene before the problem happens and forecast what a lot of your idle inventory is going to be ahead of time? And fundamentally, the logistics partner will make it cheaper for you to take it to point B instead of give it to the waste management provider, let's say, or the waste manager will be a part of this. It's not to say that we're replacing them at all. Rather, they're an active part of this beforehand. So I think that's also really important, because when you have like low value items, I feel like companies are a lot more guarded. They're like, why should we spend money shipping it to this guy or trucking it to that guy where we could just throw it out for this much? So I think, again, logistics has been a really potent barrier. And I feel that this region will really benefit from, logistics companies and waste management companies giving options A, B, or C, that fundamentally allows autonomy for the businesses with the waste to actually make a choice. Because right now, many of them, they actually don't have that much of a choice.
Or they think they don't have that
Or they
much of
think
a
they don't,
search.
exactly, yeah.
What are the challenges that you're facing whenever you pitch the surplus? Because for now, like for me, of course, obviously it makes so much sense. And I would expect, so many organizations to like just jump on it, and be part, of the surplus and the platform. What do you think is stopping them to really embrace, the circular economy?
How long do you have? Like, my God.
As long as you want.
Okay, so to keep it very brief, there's always the structured way to go about some of these barriers, right? The first thing is perceptions of scale-ups and startups. If you're in climate tech, people want sexy, attractive KPIs. How much carbon did I emit? How much carbon have I saved? So these are some of the things that I think that we really struggle with, is in terms of educating. We are not educators, and we struggle with that. And we tell people, look, this is the philosophy of the way that we're doing things. And so often I find that the team spends more time doing climate education than they do kind of converting the customer. The second thing is we stop B2B. The sales cycle was just too long. As you know, for most SaaS products, it's the same. So as a technology company, we are actually a technology first and foremost company. There are, I suppose, barriers of pricing. So it took us a really long time to find the sweet spot of what is a good price for the size of customer, for the project. And of course, the pricing mechanisms can be extremely divergent, especially when you're working with, international entities, right? So I cannot price what I would for one customer here, especially if they're semi-government, compared to Malaysia. So I think from our front, there was some challenges around pricing as well, agreeing on what is the value you're going to deliver and so on. Once the case is set and once they start making money, we don't hear any complaints. And, our sort of lifetime value is actually quite healthy. In terms of, maybe cultural perceptions of waste is, again, we're not like a waste management provider. So understanding sort of like what we do in essence, again. So I think those are really the three core things that are driving the most barriers in terms of adoption. But at the same time, we've mitigated, and I'm optimistic at the same time, because people just want to do well. And most people you meet, they really want to do well for the environment, for society at large. They just need to understand how it pertains to what they're doing and what role that they can play.
What would you advise them, those organizations? Like if any company, like let's say, is listening to this podcast and saying, well, interesting, but I don't know how to, to get started. I don't know anything about the circular economy. What would you advise them like to really get started, practically speaking?
Honestly, like, make it your problem. Make it personal, because if it's not personal, then they can't really push it along the way that they potentially could. Um, and I feel that it's always really helpful to have a little bit of an understanding of what's actually going inside what's going on inside your own organization. And to sort of like give you like a really brief example that might seem a little bit abstract is like, we were actually talking to someone who was within the EV supply chain. And they were saying that EVs are, fundamentally the most important thing to make, and they don't need to do any changes within their own organizations. I was like, okay, great. In order to produce 1 gigawatt of energy that actually stems from the EV supply chain, you need about 43,000 tons of copper, 13,000 tons of nickel, and 3,000 tons of cobalt. So, and he turned back and he's just like, okay, what does that have to do with anything? I was like, you need a lot of materials, right? And what happens to all of the waste streams of those materials? We're still relying on the extraction value of something that is natural capital, which is not currently priced properly yet, right? We talk about carbon pricing and all the rest of it, but I'll get back to the point of the story, is that he started to understand that there was actually waste from basically the very beginning of the supply chain, from extraction. And he had an opportunity to be able to go up the value chain and actually instigate that change to say, hold on a second, maybe there's an opportunity for us to do something with the processing, right? Or we can capture some of that waste, or maybe we could tweak some of our own internal operations to optimize what we're already doing. It's not to say that, they shouldn't be making EVs, not at all. It goes to say that, he had to make it his business and understand the bigger picture to see where he can actually get started. But it's that saying, right? It's like, you can't manage what you don't measure. And I'm not saying, go in with granularity of detail, but just have a snapshot overview of like what's actually going on in your own house and where do you actually see the problems, and then you can start looking for the relevant solutions.
But for that, it needs a lot of awareness and knowledge.
I think curiosity is the right thing, to be honest. Like, I don't, we generally, and I think you'd agree with me, like, you don't expect people to be sustainability or circular economy experts. You just need to be a bit inquisitive. We're learning every day. I mean, this is like some of the most fastest moving information is coming at us at all different directions every day. It's like, plastic is good, plastic is bad, this is good, that is bad. And we're overwhelmed, bombarded with information. And I think that we're all, trying our best to the best of our ability. But at the same time, if you're not curious, you cannot do better.
The Surplus, as I said in my introduction, is a certified B Corp or B Corporation. So it's a company that meets high standard of environmental and social impacts. We have very few B Corps in the region, and I'm always surprised that startup, in business for just a couple of years, has been through this very rigorous process and getting this certification in a region that still, let's be honest, does not understand or does not know much about B Corp. So I wanna ask you, what motivated you to take this path so early in your startup journey?
Actually, we were following you for some time. And, I feel that there was a lot of opportunity to lay the groundwork to have an impact focused company from the beginning, because we don't know what's going to happen a couple of years down the line. There could be new hires, there could be, new governing policies like within the organization and so on. So I felt that, in terms of, documentation processes and ethics and trying to do the best that we, possibly can, I was inspired by a lot of your content that, why don't we start doing this from the beginning? That could set this really strong groundwork, and there is no room, absolutely no room to deviate from that path of actually trying to be a company for good down the line. And yes, it was a painful process, but I do think that, it is something that now we can proudly continue on and learn from. And more importantly, like, I don't know if B Lab will listen to this podcast, but like,
we'll send it to them.
You should send it to them, because like, the work that you're doing And we've actually done recently is we're bringing so much awareness because of you to the B movement, because companies here half the time, they're like, what do you mean B Corp? What is a B Corp? We educate them about it, right? And going back to your point of education, we're like, well, here's like an expert, and she's sort of like, leading this movement in this region. And it's actually quite impressive, because when we actually went through that phase, you remember, there was actually no expert in our region. So we got a non-regional expert to actually grill us for all of this. And so what that indicates is that there's an appetite, like you said, with the growing B Corp movement here. And it's, kind of bringing a little bit of a opportunity to be able to, let's say, network when we're going to represent, right? We go to represent UAE in official delegations, unofficial delegations. And we're very proudly like a climate tech startup that came from here and said, look, we're a startup, and there's a growing movement of companies that are B Corps in the region. And they get surprised, like, there's B Corps, in GCC. Like, yeah. And did you know, like, UAE has this many, B Corps and so on. So it looks really great for the region that there is a growing movement, there is an appetite. And I forgot the rest of your question.
No. I mean, you're right, Rana, and thanks for the kind words. What did you see the benefits so far? Because it's funny, because just a couple of weeks ago, there was another B Corp founder sitting just, where you're sitting right now. And he was telling me, like, listen, we've been doing all this work, but as you said, we still need to educate, our clients, our partners. No one knows about it compared to other, region in the world where they are really getting the benefits in a way,
Yeah.
Of this work. We're not, like, no one cares.
Yeah.
So how because you got certified less than 1 year ago. So how was the reaction? And did you get any benefit, any preferences also, in the supplier selection? Because you have this ability now to demonstrate your impact and, tick the box also of ESG.
Definitely. Again, like I said, for sort of like Western economies, you will definitely feel that, when you're registering in their supplier, portals, or you want to partner with them, you will get preferential sort of arrangements. But in the region, it's still not recognized, but it will be. It's a matter of time, with the upcoming ESG regulation, and there's, so much sort of awareness, with great individuals like yourself. I think it's just a matter of time before we do actually, I suppose, bear the fruits of our labor, because we were expecting like a big hoopla, like, we are the B Corp. And then, there'll be some kind of like magnificent moment, where people are like, oh, these guys are a B Corp, these doors would open. No, it's not that easy. And, but that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's that, we went through this whole sort of journey, and now more and more people are coming to actually appreciate and understand it. When you walk through the mall, you see, tags, rituals, and all these larger companies. They are absolutely astounded that a small company was able to get a B Corp status, because they know how difficult it is. And if the large companies recognize that, it's a matter of time before, other stakeholders within society do as well. So yeah, in terms of internationalization, business development, for sure, even investors are really impressed when you bring up B Corp, because they feel that that's like a layer of due diligence that is,
it's done, basically.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rana. I mean, we can really feel your passion, and not only your passion, your expertise in the circular economy and the surplus economy, as you call it. So the 2025,
Yeah.
words. I love it. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast, and I wish you all the success with the surplus.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in until the end. So please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to search for Impact Talk on all the podcast platforms. We are also now on Fly Dubai, RTA taxis if you live in Dubai, and Saudi Airlines. So our content is getting out there. So please support us, comment, and subscribe. It means a lot to us. And stay tuned for our upcoming episodes.